I came home from work and saw a sold sign planted in my front yard. Not a joke, not a mistake. A bright red sign, bold letters, standing exactly where my rosebush used to be. Inside the house, a man I trusted smiled and said, "We sold it. You're too young to need a place like this." That was the moment I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. If you're listening right now, pause for a second and tell me where you're listening from, because what I walked into that day changed everything I thought I knew about family, ownership, and power. My name is Rebecca Miller. I'm 28 years old, and until that afternoon, I believed I had done everything right. I'm a structural engineer. My life is built on deadlines, blueprints, site inspections, and problem-solving under pressure. I work on large infrastructure projects across the country, sometimes overseas, often away from home for weeks at a time. It's exhausting, but I chose it. I earned it. The one thing that kept me grounded through all of it was my house. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't flashy. It was a modest home in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Seattle. A place with early morning light in the kitchen, lavender candles on the windowsill, and a creaky step on the stairs I always meant to fix. I bought it myself. Every down payment, every mortgage payment, every repair. It was proof that I could stand on my own. 3 weeks earlier, I had left for a project in California. Long days, late nights, airport food, and hotel rooms that all felt the same. When I finally drove back into my neighborhood, jet-lagged and running on fumes, all I wanted was to unlock my door, make coffee, and disappear into sleep. That's when I saw the sign. At first, my brain refused to accept it. I slowed the car, then stopped completely. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. My chest felt hollow, like the air had been punched out of me. "No," I whispered. "This can't be real." I got out of the car and walked closer, hoping it was for the wrong house. It wasn't. My address was printed clearly at the bottom. My home had been sold. I ran inside. The smell hit me first. Not coffee, not lavender, just cardboard, packing tape, and dust. My furniture was gone. My photos were gone. The space echoed when I stepped forward, as if the house itself no longer recognized me. And then I heard his voice. "Rebecca, you're back earlier than I expected." Mark, my stepfather. He stood near the dining room, calmly folding one of my sweaters into a box. He looked relaxed, almost pleased, like a man finishing an errand. "What is this?" I demanded. My voice shook despite my effort to steady it. "What did you do?" He didn't even look up. "Don't get upset," he said. "We took care of things." "We?" I asked. "What do you mean, we?" He finally faced me and smiled. The kind of smile that assumes authority. "Your mother and I made a decision. We sold the house." My heart dropped. "You had no right." Mark sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "Rebecca, you're young. You're barely home. A place like this is too much responsibility for you. Renting would make more sense." "This is my house," I said. "I paid for it." He laughed softly. "You think you did everything alone? That house was family property, shared assets. You should really read the paperwork more carefully." The room tilted. "That's not true." "Oh, it is," he replied calmly. "While you were away, we refinanced. Completely legal." I felt my hands go numb. "Where's my mom?" I asked. "She's in Italy," he said. "She needed a break." A break. From me. I stood there surrounded by boxes that held my life, realizing something far worse than losing a house had just happened. My trust had been dismantled with the same precision I use to dismantle structures for a living. That was the moment the shock turned into something colder, something sharper. And I knew, standing in that empty house, that I couldn't compromise any further. I told Mark he couldn't do this. I said it slowly at first, then louder, as if volume alone might force reality back into place. I reminded him the deed was in my name, that every mortgage payment had come from my account, that I had signed every document myself. I expected resistance, maybe anger, maybe a crack in his confidence. Instead, he smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't rise to the eyes, the kind worn by people who believe the argument is already over. He leaned back against the counter and crossed his arms, as calm as if we were discussing the weather. "Rebecca," he said, "while you were away, we refinanced the house." The word refinanced landed wrong. Heavy, clinical, final. "You're lying," I said, but my voice betrayed me. Something inside my chest had already begun to collapse. "I'm not," he replied evenly. "The paperwork was adjusted months ago. The ownership structure changed. Your name was removed." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. "That's impossible," I said. "I would have known." He shrugged. "You were busy, traveling, working. These things happen quietly when people trust each other." I felt heat rush to my face. "You forged my signature." His eyes hardened just enough to make the message clear. Everything was done legally. That word again. Legally. It echoed through the room like a verdict. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. She didn't answer the first time, or the second. On the third call, a message appeared on my screen. "I don't want to talk about this right now." When she finally picked up, her voice was calm, almost detached, as if she were discussing an inconvenience rather than the erasure of my life. "Mom," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Did you know about this?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Yes," she said. "Mark and I talked about it." "You sold my house," I said. "You didn't even ask me." "We did what we thought was best," she replied. "You're never home. A house like that is a lot of responsibility. You don't need all that at your age." The words cut deeper than anything Mark had said. "I wanted that responsibility," I told her. "I worked for it." She dismissed it with a tired tone I recognized from childhood. "You're being dramatic. We found you a better option. A smaller condo closer to the city. Low maintenance. Practical." Practical. I ended the call without saying goodbye. I sank onto the floor, my back against the wall, the house eerily quiet around me. It felt wrong to call it my house now. It felt like standing inside a place that had already decided to forget me. I opened my laptop and started digging. The documents were there, hidden in plain sight, buried under legal language and fine print. Refinancing records, deed transfers, dates that matched the weeks I had been out of state, working 12-hour days, trusting the people who were supposed to protect me. My name was gone. I moved to my banking app next. My hands trembled as I scrolled. Then I saw it. The deposit. Just under $500,000 from the home sale. Followed by a blur of transactions that made my stomach turn. First-class airline tickets, luxury hotels, designer purchases, international wire transfers. My money, my house, gone. I waited for tears to come. They didn't. What I felt instead was something colder, sharper, a clarity that cut through the shock and left nothing but truth behind. This hadn't been an impulsive decision. It wasn't about concern for me or my lifestyle. It was control. They had decided what I deserved, what I could handle, what I was allowed to own. Mark reappeared in the doorway, watching me quietly. "You'll get over this," he said. "You always do." I looked up at him then, really looked at him, and understood that the man standing in front of me believed I would fold, that I would accept whatever replacement they handed me, and thank them for it. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I closed my laptop, stood up, and met his gaze. Inside, something had shifted. I wasn't thinking like a daughter anymore. I wasn't thinking like someone hoping to be understood. I was thinking like someone who had just learned the rules of a game she never agreed to play. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being underestimated. I didn't confront Mark again. Not because I was afraid, and not because I had forgiven anything. I stayed quiet because I finally understood something important. The moment I showed my hand, I would lose control. So I waited until I was alone, then made the first call. Lucas answered on the second ring. He had been my attorney since my early 20s, the kind of man who spoke carefully and listened even more carefully. When I told him what had happened, I didn't dramatize it. I laid out the facts, one by one, the way I would explain a structural failure on a job site. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Rebecca," he said finally, "this doesn't smell right." That was all I needed to hear. I forwarded him every document I had found, every timestamp, every digital trail that pointed to changes being made while I was out of state. He promised to pull official records and told me, very calmly, not to speak to Mark about any of it. The steadiness in his voice grounded me. It reminded me that facts, when handled correctly, had weight, The second call was harder. Andrew was my mother's older brother, the one person in the family who had never been taken in by Mark's charm. We weren't especially close, but when I explained what had happened, his reaction was immediate and sharp. "That man has always thought he was smarter than everyone else," Andrew said. "People like that leave footprints." Andrew worked in financial consulting. He knew where to look, and more importantly, he knew what careless confidence often concealed. He asked me for time, and I gave it to him without question. From that point on, my life became a waiting room. Outwardly, nothing changed. I answered Mark when he spoke to me. I kept my voice level. I didn't accuse, demand, or threaten. When he mentioned his upcoming trip to Europe, I nodded and said I hoped he enjoyed it. He looked relieved, convinced he had crushed whatever resistance I might have had. Inside, I was building something entirely different. Lucas called me 3 days later. "I found something," he said. "Your signature on the refinancing paperwork doesn't match your previous filings. Not even close." My grip tightened on the phone. "Can you prove that?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. "If it comes to it, I can prove it conclusively." The word forged hung between us, heavy but unspoken. Andrew followed soon after with his own discovery. Mark's financial records told a story that didn't align with the image he carefully projected. There were deposits that hadn't been reported, transfers routed through accounts that raised questions, and patterns that suggested deliberate concealment rather than oversight. "He's been sloppy," Andrew said. "Not reckless, but arrogant. He didn't expect anyone to look." I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was focus. For the first time since everything had been taken from me, the chaos began to organize itself. Each piece of information fit into place, not emotionally, but structurally. Cause and effect. Action and consequence. Mark sent me a photo from Paris a few days later. Champagne glasses raised, a caption about freedom and fresh starts. I replied with a single word: "Enjoy." Then I put my phone face down and let him believe exactly what he wanted to believe. I didn't chase closure. I didn't demand explanations. I let silence do the work for me. While Mark spent money like it would never run out, Lucas assembled a record that would not disappear. While my mother avoided the topic entirely, Andrew traced numbers that told a far more honest story than any conversation ever could. At night, alone in the temporary space I had retreated to, I felt the weight of what I was doing. There were moments when anger surged, when I wanted to confront Mark face to face and force him to acknowledge what he had done. But I stopped myself every time. Emotion was what he expected from me. Precision was what he wouldn't see coming. I began to understand that power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it allows the other person to step further and further into their own certainty, unaware that the ground beneath them is already compromised. I wasn't playing their game anymore. I was building my own. The day Mark returned to the country, I didn't go anywhere. I stayed close, not physically, but mentally, aware that a shift was coming, and that once it started, there would be no stopping it. It began quietly. Lucas called first. His voice was controlled, professional, but there was an edge beneath it that told me everything I needed to know. The paperwork had been filed. The requests had been made. Certain financial institutions had been contacted, and the response had been immediate. Accounts that Mark assumed were untouchable had been frozen pending review. Less than an hour later, Andrew sent a brief message, the kind that didn't need elaboration. "They're moving." I pictured Mark stepping off the plane, refreshed and smug, believing he was returning to the same world he had left. I imagined him unlocking his phone, scrolling through messages, and seeing notifications that made no sense. Declined transactions, urgent voicemails, missed calls stacking up too quickly to ignore. By the time he reached the house, the illusion was already cracking. My mother called me that afternoon. Her voice shook in a way I had never heard before. She tried to speak calmly, but fear kept slipping through the pauses. "Rebecca," she said, "something is wrong." I let her talk. I didn't interrupt as she explained that Mark couldn't access their accounts, that a government agency had contacted them, that paperwork she didn't understand had arrived without warning. For the first time, she sounded small, like someone who had finally realized she was standing on unstable ground. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just stopped protecting him." That night, Mark was asked to leave the house. The man who had once moved through that space like it belonged to him now stood outside it, furious and disoriented, arguing with a woman who was suddenly afraid of being dragged down with him. The marriage that had been built on convenience and control fractured under pressure. She chose distance. He was left with none. I didn't see him then. I didn't need to. I saw him later. It was close to midnight when the knock came. Sharp, insistent, too late to be accidental. I looked through the peephole before opening the door. Mark stood on the other side, his coat wrinkled, his hair uncombed, the confidence that once defined him replaced by something raw and frantic. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked stranded. When I opened the door, he tried to speak immediately. "Rebecca, listen," he said. "I just need a place to stay. This is temporary." I leaned against the doorframe and waited. Silence made him uncomfortable. He filled it with words. "They're misunderstanding things," he continued. "This will all get cleared up. I just need time." Time. The thing he had stolen from me without hesitation. "You always liked structure," he said, trying to soften his voice. "You understand how these things work." I studied him then, really studied him, and felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not anger, distance, the kind that comes when a person no longer holds power over you, even emotionally. "This isn't your home," I said. His jaw tightened. "You're really going to do this to me?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. "No," I said. "I'm not going to do anything. I'm just not going to stop what's already happening." He stared at me, searching for leverage, for guilt, for the version of me that used to fold when pressured. He didn't find it. For a moment, something like rage flashed across his face, followed quickly by panic. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think this makes you strong?" he said. "You're being selfish." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because the word no longer carried the weight he thought it did. "I'm being clear," I replied. I closed the door. I didn't lock it immediately. I stood there, listening to his footsteps retreat, feeling the quiet settle back into place. There was no celebration in that moment, no triumph, just a steady sense of alignment, as if something inside me had finally returned to its proper position. For the first time since everything had been taken from me, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't chasing. I wasn't asking for permission. I had drawn a line, and on the other side of it, his control no longer existed. Mark was arrested at the airport 3 weeks later. I didn't witness it in person. I didn't need to. Lucas called me that morning, his tone steady, almost gentle, as he told me that Mark had tried to leave the country and had been stopped before boarding. His passport was flagged. The charges were no longer theoretical. What had once been arrogance dressed up as confidence had finally collided with consequence. Civil cases followed quickly. Criminal proceedings moved more slowly, but they moved with certainty. There were documents, timelines, expert testimonies, and numbers that refused to lie. I attended some hearings, skipped others. I learned early on that healing didn't require watching someone fall, only understanding that they no longer had power over my life. The settlement came months later. It wasn't poetic, and it wasn't dramatic. It was enough. Enough to erase what had been taken. Enough to start again without asking anyone for permission. More importantly, it came with clarity. I didn't regain my old house, and I realized, to my own surprise, that I didn't want it back. I found a smaller place instead. Quiet. Bright. Entirely mine. No shared keys. No hidden expectations. No voices telling me what I did or didn't deserve. The first night I slept there, I left the lights on, not out of fear, but because I wanted to see everything clearly. I wanted to remember what it felt like to exist without being managed. My mother tried to reach out. At first, it was messages filled with apologies that felt carefully worded, as if she were still negotiating an outcome. Later, the messages softened. They became less about what she needed from me and more about what she had lost. I read them all. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, out of honesty. I finally understood something I had avoided for most of my life. Love that requires your silence isn't love. Family that thrives on your compliance isn't family. And boundaries are not punishments. They are protections. Walking away didn't make me cruel. It made me clear. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could endure. I stopped explaining myself to people who benefited from misunderstanding me. I stopped believing that forgiveness required proximity. There were nights when the weight of it all caught up with me, not the house, but the realization that I had mistaken control for care for far too long. Those nights didn't break me. They sharpened me. They reminded me that strength doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in the decision not to reopen a door. Today, my life is simpler. I work, I rest. I choose who has access to me. I drink coffee in the mornings without rushing, and I sleep without wondering what someone might take from me next. I didn't win by getting everything back. I won by refusing to give anything else away. If you've listened to this story from beginning to end, I'd really love to know what you think. Did it resonate with you? Did it make you reflect on your own boundaries or relationships? Let me know in the comments and tell me what kinds of stories you'd like to hear next. And if you want to hear more real, raw stories from women who found their way back to themselves, please like this video and subscribe. There are many voices waiting to be heard, and many truths still worth telling.